Hello and welcome to Finding Your Collaborative Edge, the podcast for leaders, teams and professionals who want to unlock the full power of collaboration in their lives and organisations. We are your hosts, Lucy Kidd and Annie Townend, and together with our guests, we explore what it really takes to unlock collaboration. Today, we are joined by Ali Mapletoft, and we're excited to dive into our conversation together.
Welcome, Ali. We'd love to start by asking you how you like to describe yourself.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to be here. I will always describe myself first and foremost as an artist because that's what I really feel that I am. As a lifelong creative person who uses their creativity, the word artist just covers it all. I'm also a creative consultant and I've worked as a coach. And what I love is supporting people to use their creativity, the innate creativity that we all have within us.
And what does it mean to use our creativity in our lives, in our leadership?
Well, it's interesting because I've heard both of you talk about things like trust and courage and connection. And I think what it means to use our creativity, first of all, is to trust that it's there, that it's not something rarefied that is for the chosen few, and allow ourselves to use it. In the work that I do, I work with people who will often say, I'm not creative. I don't have a creative bone in my body, is what people will say. And what I want them to know is that we're all born creative. We all have the capacity for creativity. And if we can create the space and the nervous system regulation, often, so the safety for creativity to emerge, it will. So it's about trusting that.
It's lovely. It's a lovely connection with what we bring to the teams and the leaders that we work with. First and foremost, we're really consciously working to build that trust and build that safe space for the conversation to emerge. And when you talk about creativity and that one of the challenges is that many people don't believe they are creative, it really made me think about my experience. So my mum is hugely creative and she was an artist and an art teacher. And I say was because she is still with us and alive today, but she doesn't really express and create so much art anymore. And she was brilliant and very talented at what she did, but I don't think I inherited any of that, certainly not in the way that she created. And she did dress design and dressmaking. But what I'm understanding, often through the work that we do and the invitations that we bring into the workplace for people to express themselves, is that creativity can mean so many different things. It doesn't necessarily mean painting in a certain way or designing a dress in a certain way. Really, I'm noticing it's a form of expression, of self-expression.
Absolutely. So in the work that I do with Creative Oxygen, which is a methodology and a training framework that I created, I call this creative intelligence. And I see creative intelligence as a kind of wheel. Everyone comes to that wheel in a different way. There's no one correct way to come into it. And we have 4 segments in that wheel, the way that I see it, the way that I've observed it play out with hundreds of people. We have creative thinking. So creative thinking is our problem-solving brain. It allows us to look at an issue and say, well, what can we do about this? We saw that today when this setup for this recording was being done. There was creative thinking because there's a problem or a challenge and then you address it and you change something. You use your creative thinking to solve a problem. Then we have creative ideation, which is another segment in that wheel. That's when we have ideas, we think of things, we come up with ideas seemingly out of nowhere. And the beautiful thing about creative ideation is that we can all do it. The challenge is we usually suppress it. And I think one of the reasons that we usually suppress it in the workplace is we've been taught that somehow it could be a waste of time, it could expose us to risk, it could expose us to loss, reputation, money, energy, time. We're worried that if we come up with an idea that's not good, loss will follow of some kind, often loss of reputation. And what I see with creative ideation and why it's so exciting is we've got to do the opposite of what we've been taught. We've been taught quality over quantity, which is a great mantra for so many things. But actually, when it comes to ideation, having ideas, the more we can throw out there without judging them, the better quality ideas we'll hit on. And I see that in children, they're really good at this. So I've done workshops with children where I say, let's do animation, for example. What should we make an animation about? They can think of 50 ideas off the top of their head, no problem at all. Adults will struggle to think of one or two. So that part of the wheel is really, really important. Then we've got creative action and creative expression. Now, some people need to go through creative thinking and creative ideation before they can take creative action and express themselves. Other people, like me, do it the other way round. So for me to have creative ideas and solve problems and have creative ideation, I need to take the action first. So what that looks like for somebody like me is doodling. So the action needs to come first. The action of doing something creative, even if it's mindless and just seemingly pointless, is what will lead my brain round to creative thinking, creative ideation, creative expression. So I think what we need to do with creativity and creative intelligence in general is understand that everybody has a different way of going through the gateway, going through the door. And that's what also makes it really, really exciting.
It sounds really exciting, and that you can jump on the wheel of creativity at different points. And you mentioned in there around, as adults, we maybe hold back from sharing our ideas, either because we don't feel safe enough or we don't trust our ideas, or a fear of being judged.
Yeah.
Whereas in children, there isn't that fear of being judged. There's the free expression of ideas and seeing where things go. And we talk a lot about bringing curiosity, and that when we bring more curiosity, then we stop judging. So the more curious we are, the less we judge. And that's part of a creative process. And that when we collaborate, we're more creative together. So that sort of ideation together, that your ideas spark my ideas, I'm curious, we're curious in each other's ideas, and we care about each other. But it does take courage to share the ideas when maybe it's an idea which is over there, you know, and not one that maybe we feel will be welcomed or will be perceived as relevant and important in the moment.
Absolutely. I actually brought a book today called The Courage to Create by Rollo May. I think this was published in the 1970s, but is still relevant now. And this is something that I carry around in my bag, which is why it's all dogged and it has notes in it. It even has some of the initial notes that I made for Creative Oxygen in the back where I've doodled. And courage is such an important part of it. To my mind, one of the ways that we can help to create space for courage to emerge is to make that safety, that time, that space non-negotiable in organisations, in business, in hospitals, healthcare settings, in education settings, so that we're actually allowing space for creativity to come through. It's cultural. So what I see, having grown up in a culture that was different to here, I grew up in Southern Africa in a small country called Lesotho, is that creativity is a catalyst for huge change if you allow it to be. I grew up in this tiny enclave in the final years of the fall of apartheid in South Africa. And this was a place where if you were in exile, if you were an exiled author, an exiled writer, if you were a freedom fighter, if you were a revolutionary communist, whatever it was, you'd probably be living there. So I went to school with the children of people who were fighting for freedom with Nelson Mandela, people who were writing poems, people who were writing manifestos, and then all sorts of other people as well. But what we saw was that collective creative energy matters, and it does change culture. And if you can nurture a culture of creativity, whether it's in a country or an organisation or a healthcare setting or a school, you can allow incredible things to happen. So it's about trusting we all are creative innately. I don't believe in the uncreative person. And then it's about allowing creative ideation, creative thinking, creative action, creative expression to be a normal part of your culture.
You spoke about growing up in a very creative culture and then coming to this country or living here now. What was that like, moving from that culture where there were a lot of different kind of creative things happening to being here?
Well, it was a culture shock for me, certainly. For the first thing I noticed was I'd never seen so many white people in my life. So I was like, oh, lots of people who look like me. This is very strange. And also, I think that the way we approach creativity in the UK is different. It is more reserved. There is a kind of requirement for permission, maybe more here than there is somewhere like that. I grew up around kids who made their own toys. They would make little cars that they would push along the road out of tin cans and wire and bits of old tyre that actually work, that function. That's engineering, and it's also the creative arts. Kids were doing stuff like that all the time. Where I grew up, they're very, very resourceful. People paint the outside of their houses with a type of pattern called ditema, which is sort of geometric, very symmetrical patterns. So the average person has developed these creative skills to create a large-scale mural or to engineer a small toy car that actually works when you push it along. It's not because those people have something different in their brain to anyone else. It's because they've been practicing all their lives and because it's a normative part of their culture. So I think what I noticed when I came to the UK is that creativity is behind gates. There are gatekeepers to creativity. So whereas in Lesotho and in South Africa to a large degree, people will make art and simply sell it on the side of the street. People will make art and paint the outside of their house. People will make art in their house, make a mural, paint their house bright pink if they feel like it, and do things that seem, compared to this culture, very free and expressive. And I don't know why we gatekeep the arts, why we have high arts and low arts in this country, in this culture. But I do have a suspicion that it's got something to do with our imperial history, with trying to create a deliberate definition or a deliberate line between what is establishment and verified by the establishment and what isn't. And that exists to a lesser degree in other places. So being an artist isn't gate-kept in the same way. So I did notice that. I noticed that to be taken seriously as an artist here, you needed to be in particular galleries and that sort of thing. Whereas over there, you just make the art and then go, here it is, it's for sale. You know, it's a different way of being.
And more accessible.
More accessible. And that's not to say that there aren't enormous benefits and privileges to being here as well, you know, access to materials and things. But then with that said, I observe time and time again that if you give people unlimited access to any material, any idea, any direction, they get completely stuck. Whereas if you give people a limitation or a boundary of some kind. People don't like the word limitation in organisations. They like words like, a boundary or a perimeter or something like that. Let's say if you give people a perimeter, like, we're going to create a tower, but it has to be out of pebbles, they'll be much more likely to just go for it. Whereas if you say create a tower out of anything, people sort of go,
where do I start?
I don't know. I don't know what to do now. I feel under pressure. So there's that as well. Creating these healthy garden walls, perimeters around things and saying, right, within this, let's create whatever we want. I think that can be helpful to get people started.
I found it helpful hearing about creative constraints. So thinking about something. So let's be creative and let's draw on what are the creative constraints, which is something I hadn't come across.
Yeah.
But in organisations and in the work that we do, that can be really helpful. So it's again that expansion, and I suppose it's expanding to the edges. And we talk a lot about edges and we talk about collaborative edge, but really we're also talking about that's where creativity happens. So there are often some creative constraints, but equally there is this invitation, rather than seeking permission, there's an invitation to be creative within them, which is a very exciting place to be with other people.
And if we bring that into sort of the work setting organisationally, how could we be encouraging and inviting leaders who really need creativity to be kind of unleashed and flowing within their teams for all sorts of reasons? What are some ways that leaders could be inviting that?
I think there are many, many ways to do this, from the simplest thing, which could be something as simple as saying to people on your team, why don't you go for a walk and think about this thing that we've just talked about in the meeting, rather than, I want to see a report on my desk in 45 minutes. Encourage people to get outside and look at the sky and go for a walk. You can have simple spaces within an office, within a hospital, within a school or a university that are kitted out to encourage creativity. Again, in simple ways. These things don't have to cost the earth. They don't have to be very technologically advanced. I think because we spend so much time on screens, I'm an advocate for stepping away from the screen sometimes and using our hands to do something. I listened to an interview with the very famous writer, humanitarian, Vandana Shiva. And what she said was that our humanity is in our hands. It's what we do with our hands. I've seen people have incredible ideas from doing 10 minutes of pebble stacking. It's very simple. So there's something about stepping away from a screen that I think is extremely important, particularly now, where we live through screens. I can barely go out with my kids and order some chips and burgers without having to use my phone and a screen, right? So to step away from that, I think is very healthy. My children go to a Montessori school, and what I've learned from that environment is very interesting. That's a pedagogy that is based all around environment and tactile touch. So children from 0 to 18 are learning things, processing things, integrating information through what they do with their hands. The same thing that Vandana Shiva was talking about, which is that's what connects us to our humanity. If we think about where we are now in terms of industry and culture, we're in a very, very young industry, a very, very young culture, a very, very young socioeconomic and cultural dynamic. Humans have existed for thousands of years using our hands on a daily basis to make and create and to form things, whether that would be a pot or some food or a spear or whatever it is, I do believe that we innately within us have the capacity and the need to do that. So as wild as it might sound to some people, you could have a pebble stacking corner. You could have a table with some Lego on it. You could have a policy that you give people time to go for a walk. These things are simple, but people find them difficult to trust because they've not seen business done in that way before.
And it's something that we encourage in our work. So it's lovely to hear you speaking about it, where we encourage people always. There isn't any work that we do without inviting people to go for a paired conversation, to have a walk and talk, or to sit outside, to be side by side, to step away and to take some time. And I was thinking about that hands-on experience that you were talking about, and how when we sat down today, you know, the kind of experience of sitting down that you brought our attention to, and that awareness. There are some very simple things that we can do and practice that enable us to feel safe, to trust ourselves, and to then be more creative. And often the stepping away, the being outside, being in a different environment is, I like the pebble stacking. That sounds like real fun. Something that we'll possibly introduce, find something. And, you know, I encouraged somebody with whom I was working the other day on a walk and talk, and they shared with me something that they'd written. It was a very long piece, and I came across, and they've written about it on LinkedIn, the found poem. So I said, you know, take what you've written away and get creative and create a poem. And a bit like, well, I'm not an artist, I'm not a poet, I'm not a singer, I don't sing. And they created this really fantastic found poem from this lengthy piece of writing down to a few lines. So a little bit like stacking the pebbles.
It's really important. It's really important for our health and well-being. I think it's really important for the quality of our creative thinking and our experience. You know, what are we doing here if we're not getting something out of the experience of work, of care, of education? I firmly believe that we should be getting something out of it in terms of joy, enjoyment. And it should be able to be a space where our well-being is nurtured. I've been speaking to a hospital recently about working with healthcare workers to support them to feel more engaged, to feel more valued, because this is one of the challenges that they have. I think it's something like 75% or thereabouts of NHS workers feel burnt out and exhausted, which is too much. You know, so some of these practices, even if people are able to just take 5 minutes to stack pebbles, to doodle, to make something with their hands, to walk around and maybe experience something sensory or a sound, something that is different from what they're experiencing constantly in their work. I think it's very healthy. And what we're seeing more and more is that the myth that technology would set us free, it hasn't unfolded like that. You know, I grew up in the 1980s where we used to have computers that had sort of little triangular things that you could move around with your mouse. It was so rudimentary. And they told us, well, by the time you're a grown-up, you'll just be able to talk to your computer and it will do your work for you. Well, we have part of that, but it hasn't lessened the workload at all. And when I speak to people like leaders in the NHS, what they're saying is that the technology means that they are expected to respond instantaneously to every communication that comes their way. So these are people who really need that opportunity to step away, and they really need the reminder that they do have creativity on their side. Their creativity is there. And I've seen that creativity firsthand when my daughter was 14 months old, she suffered for the first time from anaphylactic shock after eating peanut butter. And we were very fortunate to be taken to the hospital in Brighton very, very quickly to the A&E. She was in a very, very dangerous situation. I said to them, to the paramedics, is she going to be okay? And he said, I'm sorry, I can't tell you that. So I knew it was serious. And more paramedics and doctors kept arriving with more and more equipment. And she was panicking and her airways were closing up and her heart rate was too high. And one of the paramedics said to me, lie on the gurney and hold her in the position that you normally hold her when you've been breastfeeding her and things. He said, is she breastfed? And I said, yes. And I held her in that position and he said, sing her the song that you sing to her when you're either feeding her or she's going to sleep. So I was there on the gurney singing Row, Row the Boat to her. And that one spark of creative thinking brought her heart rate down enough for them to save her life.
Amazing.
And that was creative thinking in the A&E, you know. How many paramedics would think of sing Row, Row the Boat, hold her close to your body? I don't know, but that one did, you know. That's where creativity saves lives. And I think creativity saves lives in so many ways. That was a very urgent and tangible example. It saves our life in the sense as well that if we are not allowing ourselves to be creative, we're neglecting a huge part of ourselves. And we don't know for certain what the impact of that is on the nervous system, the endocrine system, all of that stuff. But I am pretty sure that if we go and speak to doctors who care about this, they will agree that our creativity is very, very good for our health.
It's such a beautiful example of how creativity feeds our resourcefulness. So that, and you know, that expansion. So all of the work that we do when we're in organisations, inviting leaders and teams, we're inviting them to expand and to be and feel more resourceful. And that example you just gave about that moment with your daughter, which must have been so frightening for all of you, gave you an opportunity to really slow down and to connect and to have that kind of body to body, human to human experience, that moment of connection, of really being there and being in it together. And then that regulates the system, it slowed her heart rate down, it probably gave you a lovely moment of comfort and connection and for both of you. And often what we experience with organisations is there isn't always a language around this.
Right.
And often the language of creativity might not exist in organisations. However, the language of resourcefulness and capacity and resilience and increasingly emotional regulation does. So something that we pay a lot of attention to is the words and the language that we use and the impact that has on us as human beings. And we're always looking to encourage and deepen human connection. And it sounds as if you are as well, in terms of...
Yeah. I think those things go together so much, you know, human connection, curiosity, creativity, all of the C's, you know, we keep mentioning all of the
that
C's.
C word.
Yeah, all of the C words. I think they are so important. And I think you're right, when we are able to creatively express ourselves, to use our creativity, to give it the time and the space, it opens up and it sort of stretches our capacity. And that's something that I've had to think about more and more, you know, being somebody who's got children of different ages and work to do and responsibilities. You sort of need to find ways to expand your capacity. Otherwise, you're constantly in a mode of trying to protect it. And that can actually end up feeling like your capacity is shutting in on itself if you go into that very sort of protective mode around your capacity. one of the things that I struggled with for a long time, even though I identify as an artist, even though I help other people to be creative, is giving myself the time and space for that creativity. And if I spend just 5 or 10 minutes a day doodling in my notebook or, painting something, I know that that's going to open up a huge amount of emotional resource, mental resource as well for me. And it doesn't have to be that. For some people, it's cooking or going for a walk and naming the trees as they walk through the park or whatever it is. But these things do give us capacity. And I think that informs everything from life at home and how we are with our families or our loved ones or our pets or just ourselves, as well, and how we perform in the workplace. I think that creativity is very serious business. I think that creativity is infrastructure that we need to be taking very, very seriously and not dismissing it as something that is for the chosen few or as something that is just about kids stuff. And this is one of the myths that I see, is that people do believe that creativity is for children, and we need to reclaim creativity, creative expression, creative ideation, creative thinking, creative action for everybody, because we all need to be engaged in that.
It's what you said earlier on, I think, around creating cultures of creativity and talking about it. So we often talk about, what helps you to feel safe. And from our conversation today, I can imagine us inviting people, what does creativity mean for you?
Yeah.
What does it really mean to be creative? And all the very many different ways we have of being creative, of thinking creatively, and different points like you were talking about earlier in Creative Oxygen of where you join. And as you were talking, I was thinking about my education, and your education was different again. But my education, where I had to make a choice between art and science very early on. So I loved art and I loved biology, a science, but those two weren't possible to do at A level. And how ridiculous is that?
Ridiculous.
Where we can be creative, paint, take photographs, write, do this thing over here, and we can bring what I think of as a creative mindset in terms of curiosity, care and courage that we talk about to everything that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've just made me remember something. When I was at that same stage, I wanted to do computer sciences and art. And my parents are artists and creative, so it was always a given that was sort of in me, and we were a very creative family, so I was never going to give up the art. But they said, no, you can't do computer sciences because you're doing art. And how ridiculous is that? Because when we think about how the world is now, and also the fact that after that, I spent 8 years as an animator, an animation director, which is computer sciences and art mixed together, that they couldn't give you the option to do those two things. But what I observed in my school, and it was a good school, it was a good international school, was that the girls were nudged and encouraged a little bit more towards the art room, and the boys were encouraged and nudged a little bit more towards the computer science route. And I think that that's a real shame. I really, really do. And I hope that's not still happening. I don't hear of that happening with my daughter who's 16 or my daughter who's 9. I think they feel more like all these things are possible for us. But there has been historically this nudge towards arts and crafts for women because it's meant to be soft, and then this nudge towards science, mathematics, computer science. And again, this speaks to the myth that logic is more important somehow or more worthy than creativity. Sometimes I say, people think that logic's more important than magic, but actually you need a bit of both, don't you? And they work so well together.
I love that.
I love
Logic
that. I
and
know.
magic, which made me think if there was a title for our conversation today, what would the title be?
Oh, yes. Okay. Well, I brought the book with me, The Courage to Create. So it got me thinking about something around the courage to create, or creative intelligence. I think it's still pretty open. I love the logic and magic angle as well. For me, it's about really understanding that creativity and productivity are not competing with each other. We can bring those things together, and we can use our creativity in service of so many incredible things. So we need a title that really says that.
Lovely. And you did bring another book.
I did.
That's hidden under.
I did. And I'm not going to say too much about it because I've only just started it, but I am reading Nick Cave's book, which is The Death of Bunny Monroe. But what I love about Nick Cave, not only is he local, but Nick Cave is somebody who allows himself to express his creativity in so many different ways. This is a person who is a musician, a writer, an author, and then really surprisingly, and I didn't know this until about a year ago, he also creates pottery. So over a period over lockdown, Nick Cave disappeared into his own world and created a collection of sort of sculptures and dioramas and didn't tell anyone about it until it was finished. And then suddenly he has this exhibition of pottery. And what I love about that, is that called being a polymath? Is that what that is, when you're into lots of different, you do lots of different things? I love that because I think that it's a mistake to pigeonhole ourselves creatively as one thing. So I really admire the way that somebody like that can be a fiction author, a potter, sculptor, musician. I think that that's really, really inspiring.
What is something you can share with people who are thinking, actually, I want to do more of this. I want to either be more creative myself, or I want to encourage my colleagues and my teams, or even my managers to be more creative. What are some of the ways that we can be inviting people to do that and to find their own edges, to go beyond them in that creative way?
That's a really interesting question. And what the data shows us through various different studies is that creative outcomes are linked to belief. Belief is the leading thing. You know, if you don't believe that you're creative, then you're not. So fostering a belief within your organisation that everybody's creative, and reminding people regularly, you are creative, pointing out to people what you just did there was very creative. And also speaking about creativity with respect. I think I grew up in an environment where creativity was treated with respect, and it was a shock to me to come here in the late 90s, early noughties, and find out that people would say, that's very creative, as a disparaging remark. And so how we talk about creativity within our organisations makes an enormous difference. People don't say, oh, that's very mathematical, in a disparaging way, or, you know, that's very process driven in a disparaging way in the same way. So if we can treat creativity with respect by leadership showing, demonstrating that they respect creativity, and actively encouraging people to use their creativity by telling them that they already are creative, that is a huge instigator for creative action.
Wonderful.
And it's so connected to our work and our belief that if everybody can bring more curiosity, care and courage as a mindset, then we're creating safety for expression, for the big conversations to surface, and to invite more of that creativity.
Absolutely. And, you know, if people aren't convinced by that, if leadership aren't convinced by that, what we need to look at is numbers, is data. 81% reduction in stress from doing creative things. Studies have shown this. I think it's 17% more productivity when you engage in creative interventions. Those are serious numbers. Those are things that we need to be looking at and going, well, hang on a minute, that actually does make a difference to the bottom line. And I think if people knew that, perhaps that would be a gateway through into changing the culture and creating that strong belief that everybody's creative and everybody has a creative contribution to make.
Thank you.
So as we're coming to the end of our conversation and our time together today, we'd love to invite you to share 3 invitations to others to really bring more of their own creativity into their life and into their leadership.
Oh, okay. So I think that the first invitation is an invitation around belief. And even if this is just saying this to yourself as a mantra, I think telling yourself regularly, I am creative. This is very, very important because, as we said, belief is one of the number one, if not the number one thing that's going to make a difference to creative outcomes. Tell yourself you're creative. If you need to write it down 100 times in your journal, do it. Write it down. So that's the first thing that I would do. Have time away from communication with other people. You know, in order to go into a creative space, I do believe that we need to create a kind of bubble around our energy sometimes. And sometimes that means solitude. I don't know a single artist or author or writer who doesn't take themselves off, even if it's for half an hour, shut the door, put a table up against it if they have children, and get that moment of I'm on my own. Go for a walk if you need to. Dogs are allowed, but not other human beings. Not other humans. So have that space. Allow some solitude. I honestly see it being so helpful to people, whether they're in leadership or part of a team or anybody. And then the third thing I would do would be have a creative space somewhere in your home, in your office, somewhere. That doesn't need to mean you have an entire artist studio like Picasso. It could be a tea tray that you keep a journal and some pencils on. It can be as small as that. If you do all your work at home on your kitchen table and you don't have a spare room or you don't have a place, get yourself a nice tea tray from the charity shop or eBay or something and put some things on it that inspire you. I've got a tray like that. It's got a really lovely pebble that's nice to hold. So sometimes I just sit there and hold that pebble and think. It's got a nice notebook and it's got some pencils on it. And that is my portable creative space. I know artists that have a piece of tarpaulin that is their studio that they can fold up and put in a backpack and take to the beach. It's a pop-up creative space. And I think anybody can find an old piece of tarp or a tea tray with a journal on it and create their own kind of pop-up creative space.
Brilliant. I love all those.
That, yeah.
3 invitations are fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ali, for being in conversation with us today. We've really enjoyed our time with you.
Thank you.
We'll be sharing your new website, creativeoxygen.co.uk, in the show notes for people to find you, connect with you and collaborate with you and to have their own conversation with you about all the things we've been speaking about. Thank you to you, the audience, for being alongside us. If you'd like to find out more about how we can help you find your collaborative edge, please do visit our website, collaborationequation.com. We look forward to connecting and being in conversation with you. Thank you to Brown Bear Studio for the recording and production of this podcast, to Schmogus Media and Louisa Penny Writing for helping us promote and share this podcast. And please do like and subscribe and join us next time for our next conversation. And thank you to you, Annie, for your partnership and collaboration.
Thank you, Lucy.